A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Jessica Lancod-Frost, Policy Officer at NAUC. It is my pleasure to be chairing today's event on the good, the bad, and the ugly of social media in the local council sector. Firstly, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping announcements, some of which are shown on the slide on screen. Do use the Q&A function throughout the event to put questions to our speakers, and the chat function to interact with your fellow delegates and to share any information or links. If you require any technical support, please do post in the chat. My NAUC colleagues will try their best to help. The closed caption feature, subtitles, can be accessed by all attendees at any time during today's event. For desktop, laptop users, to turn on closed captions, please select Show Captions. The button will be labeled CC. If the button is not visible, please select the three dots in the bottom right corner of the screen. Then please select Captions. After that, you'll be prompted to click Show Captions, so please select this option. If you are using a mobile device or tablet, please scroll across the menu on the bottom of your screen and select Captions. You will then need to click Show Captions. Once the captions are on, you can access a live transcription of the event. If you have selected the closed caption feature, please use the reactions feature, the next button on the right of the closed caption feature, by ticking the yes button, the green emoji with a tick, to show us that the closed captions are working at your end. If you are experiencing technical difficulties, please contact NAUC support via the chat, and we will endeavour to rectify the issue. After today's event, we will send all the presentation slides, the chat, and any other useful information. And we will also be inviting your feedback on today's event. So please do look out for the feedback form, which should pop up on your screens following the conclusion of the webinar. Now, NAUC would like to thank our partners, Clear, CCLA, and Blashare Illuminations, for their extensive support for our online events. Social media can be a powerful tool for local councils to engage with their communities, but it can also be a source of conflict and negativity. Today's event will explore the benefits and drawbacks of social media use in the sector and provide guidance on how to use it effectively and responsibly. As part of today's discussion, we will explore case studies and best practice and provide actionable advice on creating a social media policy that promotes civility and respect. So whether you're a seasoned social media user or just getting started, this event is a must attend for anyone who wants to use social media to build stronger communities. So, I'm thrilled to be joined today by a brilliant panel of speakers. Nikki Auld, Director of Communications at the Local Government Association, Daniel Purchase, Co-Director of Breakthrough Communications, and Louise Barham, Clerk at Faversham Town Council. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to you, Nikki. Over to you.
Lovely. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jessica, and really looking forward to today's session. So lovely to see where everyone's from with all the details in the chat. And I want to say a special shout out to Kingstainton Town Council, where I grew up. Nice to see you in the chat as well. We're going to start today's session actually with a couple of questions for you, I think, to help all of us on the panel understand a little bit more about who's in the virtual room today. So if we could have our first question pop up. So the first question is to understand a bit about your social media use. Are you active? Do you post regularly on social media? So yes, you do so in a professional capacity, in a personal capacity, in both, or are you still not using social media for various reasons? See people voting now. Great to see people getting a bit interactive and things changing a little bit as we're looking now. Great. So most people here, as Jessica was saying in the introduction, are fairly seasoned social media users, but hopefully still always something for us to learn and for you to share with us and others as well. If we could perhaps move to our second question then. I don't know if we can get that one up. Apologies, Olivia, if that's me doing something here. But our second question was really just to find out a little bit about which platforms you're on or how many you're using. Nope, if we can't use that one, don't worry too much. That's fine. We will dive in a little bit more to those different platforms in just a moment. So that's great. And I can see some things coming up on the chat as well. In which case, I will just start sharing my screen for you now, hopefully. And talk to you a little bit about today. So I can see lots of you obviously very active and using social media. And I think that that does demonstrate to us that more than ever before, we are a digital nation. So at the moment, just 7% of people, 7% of 16 plus people living in the UK don't have access to the internet at home. And we're all spending more time than ever before online, especially the 18 to 24 age group. And if you open your average smartphone, the average number of apps that we have on there at the moment is 36. And I did a quick count last night, a quick tally, and it was considerably more, which was a little bit of a shock to me, just how many I'm using at the moment. So what are we doing online? We're doing all sorts of things, obviously. We are searching for information, for entertainment. We're searching for love on dating websites, but social media really tops the lot. And for councillors, social media is an increasingly important public space, as Jessica said, to share local news, political views and information, and to engage with other councillors, officers, and residents as well. So it very much has the power to improve democracy by facilitating bigger, freer, and more open conversations. And crucially, it's a really direct form of communication with citizens as well. But it does also open the door for abuse, harassment, and intimidation, along with the spread rather swiftly more than before of mis and disinformation, and it can impact democracy. So today I'm going to talk through some of the top tips for safe and rewarding use of social media as an individual, and go on to talk a little bit about the rise of online abuse and how to manage this darker side of social media. So if we look at the moment at what are the top social media sites in the UK, the top 10 you can see here, and actually YouTube is now officially the most popular social media service amongst adults. It took the top spot from Facebook in 2023, according to Ofcom's Online Nation report. Snapchat and TikTok are the leading services amongst the younger adults, and things like Be Real are really starting to make a mark as well. It's now the 10th overall social media platform for 18 to 24-year-olds. So there's certainly no shortage of choice, but obviously choosing the right platform for you is really important. And to boil this down to a sentence, I think what we find, and it will be interesting to sort of hear feedback from you in the chat later on, is that Facebook, I think, is still the preeminent place for councillors. It allows you to engage with different communities and networks. It allows for some longer form explanation of issues in your local community as well. LinkedIn, I think, is increasingly a place of choice for local government professionals in particular, but also councillors as well. And Twitter is still the place to get your information out further and faster. Finding the right platform for you, it's a personal choice, but it's also worth looking at kind of the local information as well. So who else within your council is using social media really successfully? What can you learn from them about what works for them and the platforms that help them reach the audience, get the information to the eyeballs that you want to get it to as well? And talk to your council officers as well. They will have data and information about what's working for them as well. But remember, being active on social media is a choice and it's not a statutory requirement of the job. And it's important that councillors are reassured that while social media can be a helpful tool for engagement, it's certainly not essential. And it may well be that alternative forms of communication, emails, surgeries, events, may still be the right thing for you. So, in the fast-moving nature of social media, I think one of the things that we all struggle with, both personally and professionally, is the expectation of being constantly on as well. This constant engagement. How long should it take for you to get back to somebody? What kind of interaction should you be having with them? So it's really important to set specific rules of engagement and to send a clear message to users, to the people you're communicating with, about what to expect. And this is so important for you and helping you to set boundaries as well. So the graphic here is a template that we created at the LGA from some good, from some good feedback Facebook pages, too many Fs there. And this was looking at a range of councillors' pages and trying to look at the kind of way in which they were explaining how they were using social media to their users. Details here around how they prefer to be contacted, how quickly they may well respond. And importantly, it's also the place as well where you can set out the conduct that you expect from those who are interacting with you on your social media platforms. So just a few things to think about in terms of getting active on social media. So you've chosen your platform, you've thought a little bit about how you're going to use it and the boundaries that you're going to set. So the fun part is really posting. You could, of course, just pull up the app, share your thoughts, post a picture, but really having a clear purpose and planning ahead will help you get the most out of your social media. Not only does it give you some control over what you're doing so that it doesn't completely take over your life, it really allows you to think about the content, think about the story and the information that you're trying to share. So do have a plan. This is your account, remember, and while you might use it to repost content, whether that's something that's provided by your council, from NALC, from the LGA, from a political party even, the most appealing thing and the most important thing for your followers is that they get a real sense of the person behind the account, the councillor, what you stand for, the work that you're doing in your local community. So the language you use, the topics that you choose to share about, these will say something about you. So be authoritative, be as open as you can to build trust, and be you. For engagement purposes, shorter is definitely better. Twitter or X restricts you to 280 characters, slightly more if you are a verified blue tick subscriber. But whatever the word limits on any social media platform, less is definitely more. People are likely to read and engage with something when it's shorter. And really importantly, don't get drawn into using council jargon or local government jargon as well. Use accessible language for people. It's really nice to share other people's content, particularly from your local communities, whether these are photos that have been taken or content that's been created. Great to do that, but make sure that you are using that responsibly. So make sure you're crediting people and sharing some of the information that they are providing with you. And make sure that you know what you're sharing as well. One of the most important things that we see on social media, and even at an organizational level, we can get caught and burnt from this from time to time, is that you share something that on first glance you think you fully support, you understand exactly what's included there. And then when you get into the various links that are contained in somebody else's post, there's perhaps something there that you wouldn't necessarily want to share. So make sure you're really kind of interrogating the information when you share it as well, so that you're not involved in sharing mis or disinformation. But the really great thing about social media is it's an online conversation. So it's a great way to get involved with people and a really important way to actually understand how your followers are using the information you provide is to include a call to action. So is there something you want them to do? Is there a consultation you want them to engage with? Is there a poll? Is there a question that you're setting them as well? Is there an event that you want them to come along to? So make sure you're using those kind of really active calls to action as well. And you can, of course, use questions. And I think there's a really nice example. Just be slightly careful when you're asking questions that you're ready to abide by the answers to them as well. So Elon Musk asked all of his followers a question about whether he should step down as head of X when he took over Twitter. Overwhelmingly, they said yes, but he is, of course, still there at the helm. So now on to some of the darker side of social media, and that's to talk about the fact that anyone, regardless of their of their background or political affiliation, can at times be caught up in some very difficult discourse as a public representative. Now, anyone should feel safe and feel empowered to become a counsellor and be proud to represent their community, but we know that's sadly not the case. In 2022, our counsellor census showed us that 7 in 10 counsellors reported experiencing abuse or intimidation in the previous year. And in 2023, our Debate Not Hate survey of counsellors found that it was actually social media was the most common channel from which this abuse originated. Respondents noted that the relative anonymity and license offered by these platforms sometimes provides people with an opportunity to abuse counsellors with few to no consequences. And some counsellors have said that they avoid social media as a result just because of the fear of such abuse. And interestingly, this abuse tends to come from mainly 2 sources: from local residents who are particularly vocal or angry about an issue or a decision, but also from fellow counsellors as well. So I think there's an interesting thing here around respect and conversation amongst counsellors, and not only with local communities as well. So there are lots of things that you can do to stay safe, and I just very briefly, before I hand over to the other speakers, to just run through a few of these. One of the most important things you can do is just to know your rights, know what online abuse, harassment and intimidation is and looks like as well. It could come in a range of forms. It could be shared content, it could be messages, it could be threats of violence, abusive language or behaviour. The sorts of things this covers includes smear campaigns, things around bullying, body-centered abuse, doxing, impersonation, inciting hatred, amongst other activities. And some of these behaviours are criminal offences. It's important that you get familiar with the platform settings as well. So there are ways to block, mute, report and delete comments, and users in different platforms, and these are used differently in different platforms as well. So know the platform that you're using and how to do this. I know that some counsellors feel uneasy about blocking or muting users, even if sometimes it feels that the comments are abusive or threatening. There's very much, I think, within local government, people saying, well, this is the cut and thrust of politics as well. Or you hear people saying, well, this is freedom of expression. But I think it's worth having conversations within your council and with others around, where are those boundaries for you? What is not acceptable? And anything that makes you or those around you feel unsafe absolutely is not acceptable. You should lead by example, and by that I mean avoid posting or making comments yourself that could be considered abusive or divisive, or spreading unverified information as well. It's a great place, social media, if you remain constructive and positive and focused on discussions that are really important to your community as well. Consider your content. So I think, again, linked to this, we all know that there are things in local government that will be more controversial than others. So before you start posting on these kind of issues, just think through the kind of engagement and how you're going to manage perhaps some of the pushback that you may get on social media as well. For example, you could decide that you're posting information, but you might want to limit how much you engage with people in terms of the comments that follow from that. The other thing that we often hear is that when talking about perhaps more controversial decisions happening within a local area, councillors will use official press releases from the council rather than rewriting these in their own language. So pointing people towards a single authoritative piece of information as well. Diffuse conflict. I mean, one of the greatest things we should all do in local politics, whether that's online or offline, is count to 10. So taking a moment and thinking before you respond can take the heat out of situations, as can reframing your own language as well. I know that there's a great deal of pressure to respond straight away to all social media communications, but this can be very stressful, time-consuming. And again, I think there's something that we all need to consider about people's health and mental health when it comes to social media usage as well. So also linked to that, know when to step back. Remember that you do not have to engage with abusive or threatening behaviour, and you can also take time out and off social media as well. Protect yourself online and offline. And what I mean by that is just thinking about just how much information you are willing to share online. So, perhaps being slightly more careful about information you're sharing about family, personal interests, where you go, what you do as well. And particularly if this is your professional as well, you might want to keep that separation as well. Partly just so that you don't want people always to know your goings on and be able to sort of identify your whereabouts outside of official council business as well. Give and get support. I mean, social media is a great place to create communities. And I think where you are able, make sure that you're providing support to fellow councillors online, whether that's helping them get online and create a presence or supporting them if things become tricky as well. And think about acting as a digital ally. And there's some great information online from this, including from a charity called Glitches, which has guidance on being an online active bystander. So how you can help other colleagues who perhaps are getting into difficult situations online. And finally, record and report serious issues. So as I was saying earlier, people will often say, this is banter, this is the cut and thrust of politics, but please do make sure that you're looking after yourself. If you don't like what or how something is being said, if something just doesn't feel right, then don't brush it off. It's really important to screenshot comments, keep a record of abusive or threatening communications. There's a range of things that you can do, from calmly correcting people, pushing back and saying that you're not going to engage further, muting, reporting to the social media platform, and each social media platform will have details on how to do that. But also as well, if you feel unable to deal with any abuse or comments that you're getting online, or have concerns about your safety, then please do speak to your council or even the police as well. Make sure you get that support. Lots and lots of resources online, and we'll make sure that we're sharing those with you later. But that's it from me now, and I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Nikki. Apologies if anyone had any sound issues there. We will be sending the presentation after the event. And also a reminder, if you have any questions for Nikki, please put them in the Q&A box. Now, over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Jessica. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for coming along this afternoon. It's great to see so many people here. Let me just share my screen. What I'm going to try and share over the next sort of 5 to 10 minutes is strategies for success, focusing on the work that parishes, corporately, parish and town councils can do to be really effective on social media. The other way of looking at this, going back to the title of today's webinar, is how we can ensure that as councils, we can reduce and mitigate risk of the bad and the ugly in order to get more of the good. That's what this is about. And to help me understand your experience in the room, I've got one poll question for each of you too. So I'm going to ask if Nauk can put my poll on screen, which is all about, and this is really about councils as bodies, not so much for individual councillors, but for councils as organisations. What challenges, if any, do you have when it comes to social media? You can pick as many options as you like. It's multiple choice. There's also a something else option, which you can then write in the chat window what your something else is. I'm fascinated to understand where we are at and what our thinking is around the challenges that we face. It's also really interesting to see these bars moving, as Nikki said, in real time when we have these polls. Concern about negative engagement is still topping out. And you know what? I'm sadly not surprised because as we heard from Nikki, that can apply for councillors actually as much as it can for councils themselves as bodies, as organisations. A couple more seconds, 147 of you have so far taken part in that. Let's see if others can do too. This is really useful information actually for us all to reflect on how councils not necessarily struggle, but the challenges they face. Okay, a couple more seconds, then we're going to close the poll. That's really interesting. So I think we'll close the poll there. Thank you to now colleagues. So concern about negative engagement is the biggest challenge by quite some margin, but actually there are clearly lots of challenges, plural, that we face when it comes to how we use social media in our councils. And a lot of that is to do with the resources that we have. I just want to talk very briefly around why this stuff really matters. And I suspect, given that you are all here today on a social media focused webinar, you have a clear sense as to why this matters. But this is actually about bringing your colleagues with you on a journey. Because quite often when I go around the country and talk to councils, there are some people, whether it's officers or members, who are really in favour of going all in on social media as a council, as a body. But there are others, understandably, with concerns, and we understand what those concerns are. I want to build on something that Nikki said when we heard about the numbers. Now, numbers move all the time, but what's really important to bear in mind is that a majority of people in our country actively use social media every day. That is statistically true. Now, what that means, because we all have personal views on social media, whether it's appropriate in different ways, whether we use it personally, whether we use it professionally. What is important to bear in mind is that we need, as councils, as bodies, to remove and set aside any personal preferences for communication, filters or biases that we have, and understand that given a majority of our communities are active on social media, we need to be there too, I would strongly argue, as parish and town councils. And social media should form a pillar, an integral pillar of one of many, of course, both online and offline, when it comes to how you engage with your community. And councils that get this right and do this most effectively are the ones who really think through the who, the what, the why, the where, the how. Why are you using social media as a council? That in itself is a really powerful question that your council should have. And when you've agreed on the why, how will it work in the context of the very specific resources, usually very finite human resources, that your council has to make all of that work? Now, we also need to bear in mind, of course, the risks and the opportunities, the benefits. And I'm not going to dwell too much on these because some of these we are well aware of. They came up in the poll just now, but it is just bearing in mind that there are challenges and strategic risks when it comes to how we use social media, because we have to ask ourselves, well, what happens if things go wrong? What will we do? Again, as a council, differently to what individual councillors might do when it comes to dealing with, I will use the term very broadly, negative discourse, which at one end of the spectrum could be, a resident who has very strongly held beliefs. They are passionate about a particular subject. They may not know what different tiers of local council do in their area, and may confuse what the different tiers do. And they are being almost passive aggressive towards you on social media. And at the other end of the scale, we've got people who are very clearly abusive, and everything in between. There's also the challenge of misinformation or disinformation, reputational risk if things go wrong, but also the internal impacts too. I spoke to a communications officer at a town council recently who was telling me how challenging they found it personally when the council was under attack, because it felt like they were under attack personally. And we shouldn't underestimate the impact, as well as, of course, understanding that social media is evolving all the time. We heard a minute ago about some of the newer platforms now actively being used by different demographics, different age groups, for example. How do we keep up to date with what we should or indeed shouldn't be doing? And of course, there are a plethora of compliance-related risks as well. But we mustn't forget in that if we get this right and really think about our council's specific needs, the benefits potentially are much greater. Fundamentally, being able as a council to reach particularly hard to reach groups within your community, people that may not otherwise engage with a parish or town council, increasing and amplifying your digital voice in the community, as well as breaking down barriers, who we are, what we do, why we do it. That is really powerful, almost putting a human face to the council. Lots of other benefits too. Again, these slides will be circulated after the session. But in order to mitigate the risk of the bad and the ugly of social media and to get the most from it, we need to ensure that whether you are a very large suburban town council with a multi-officer team, or whether you're a small rural parish with a part-time clerk, or anything on that spectrum, you take a strategic approach to the who, the what, the why, the where, the how. Because if you do, you're far more likely to achieve more positive outcomes as part of your wider communication and community engagement strategy, but also we are likely to reduce the risk of negative engagement. We can't mitigate against it entirely, but it is all about reducing risk. Now, fundamentally, and I'm not going to dwell on these because they'll be in the handout when they come around, but your strategy, it can be quite straightforward. There's a simple way to do this and make it work. Fundamentally, what are you trying to achieve? How will you measure success? What are your measurable objectives? Who are you trying to converse with as a council? Which bits of the community beyond everybody do we want to engage? What are we saying to those people? What are our messages? What platforms do we use? What's our strategy around content? What do we post when? And who's going to be in charge? Is this being delegated to an officer? Are councillors involved? How does that all work? Because the reality is it varies quite a bit in different parts of the country, different councils. I suspect we will have questions after the three of us have spoken around platforms. And what platform should we use? The message I'm going to bring to this from a council's perspective is, as a general rule of thumb, less is more. In so much as if the councils, particularly if it's officers acting as practitioners, we have finite resource, finite time, and spreading yourself too thinly can be a challenge. So think about what platforms you're using in order to consider who you are trying to reach. And we also need to consider what kind of content we're going to share at different times. And broadly speaking, I would suggest that content that councils post is either promoting, celebrating, sharing, signposting, or engaging. And I would urge you to think about, in the context of your own social media in your council right now, do you do more or less of some of these? Are there any of these that you don't do right now that you could do a bit more of over time? Just a few very quick examples. These will be in the handouts, but I did want to highlight some of the great practice in the sector, showcasing what our people do, what our teams do. Because actually, I've previously served as a town, district, and county councillor, and in my experience, many residents don't differentiate between tiers, and sometimes in parish and town councils, we get criticised for things that are not our fault or we haven't done. And we don't often get the credit for the great work we are doing, whether it's clearing up after a storm, telling people before it happens that because of disease, we're going to have to cut down some trees. Or telling people that, actually our contractors are out putting up Christmas lights. There's a post here on the right from Willoughby Council from a couple of years ago. It's a blurry photo, but it got incredible response on their Facebook page because it was all about something that people can relate to. I'm going to say something that I suspect no one thought would be said today in this social media session. Dog poo. Okay, dog poo. Big issue for many communities. Two councils here, Leighton Linslade in Bedfordshire, Laverstock and Ford down in Dorset, putting on great social media posts, tackling actually quite a serious subject, but doing it with the right tone of voice, the right approach, a clear call to action, clear engaging content, and pictures of cute dogs. Who doesn't like that and who isn't going to take notice of that? Also, humanising our council, bringing us to life is really important too. A couple of final things from me before I hand over to Louise, who's going to tell us about the great work that she and her team are doing in Faversham. Three sort of things I want you to really think about from today. First of all, What is your strategy? What's your approach? Because the answer to that question will vary across the country in every council. Consider your strategic approach and how you'll measure success. Break down barriers. Let's bring our councils to life and demonstrate the genuinely awesome work all councils here are doing across their communities. And of course, in the context of your resource, what sustainable conversation can you have? And very lastly from me, as we've heard already, lots of resources available. There is a best practice guide that we're bringing out next week, which we'll share a link to, which you are welcome to get a copy of and request a copy of. We also work with many of the county associations across the country and provide regular courses through them, both for clerks and officers as well. I put a link in the chat for the social media guides, and in a second I'll do that for the county association training too. Social media matters. How can you use it in your council? Over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And now over to you, Louise.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be talking about Faversham and how we use social media. I'm just checking my slides. Yeah, they're moving. That's great. So I'll be talking about Faversham and how we use social media, how our councillors use social media, and how we try and avoid the bad and ugly, and what policy and resources we have in place. Well, Faversham is a medieval market town and ancient port in Kent. We have 14 councillors representing 4 wards. Our population is just over 20,000 and our Band D is £90.25. So I think we're fairly average on that. It's just useful to remind everybody that social media is only just one way of communicating with residents, and we all use several others, I'm sure. So Nikki and Daniel have already spoken about the different social media platforms, and there are a lot. We focus on Facebook, and we probably have in excess of 10 pages. I'm not sure why, but these are our most popular 5 that we use. So our Faversham Town Council and Visit Faversham have the greatest amount of followers, and between the two we have about 10,000 followers. We have a new community bus service, so we've set up a separate page for that, and we have pages for our community lottery. We do use Instagram, X, occasionally LinkedIn and Nextdoor, but as I say, we focus mostly on Facebook. These are a few examples of our Facebook posts, and we do post about all our good news items, even the smallest, where we have a winter support scheme where we got a £2,000 grant, and we got grants for our 2-minute litter picking A-boards. Facebook is a really excellent way of reaching people quickly. If there's an emergency road closure or a flood, we find this crisis information gets shared really quickly by lots of people in a short space of time. Facebook and Instagram have excellent insights to show you how well your posts are working. If a post gets shared several times, it could reach over 25,000 people. And that's the number of people that will see it at least once. We use events, all our events go onto Facebook. It's a great way of getting everything shared. We have a new events officer, so this year we've got lots of new events that are taking place. For instance, our Pirate Festival has already showing 2,600 people interested in that event. It's a shame we can't get as much interest in our council meetings. These are Faversham's do's and don'ts, and I think it's really useful to have some sort of protocol in place. Until recently, it was just myself that did all the Facebook, but now we share it with several officers. We don't share councillors' posts onto our Facebook pages. We don't share anything political. Councillors don't have access to our social media, but they can comment on our posts, and of course they can reshare. When we share photos of our councillors, we try and make sure that we have a good political mix. We frequently share posts from our borough and county councils and local community groups. We share our posts to other Faversham community and resident pages, and we will post as Faversham Town Council rather than as individuals. All our officers and councillors have separate council profiles and personal profiles. And we find using the Meta Business Suite is quite adequate for scheduling our posts. These are a couple of great examples of our councillor Facebook pages. You will see that they have their name followed by Faversham Councillor. I've been told that these weekly updates have a far higher reach than their regular posts, and they do this really well every week. Now, I hope you're not easily offended by my next slide, so this is a warning. Be careful what you share. This photograph was sent to me by councillors to be used in the promotion of a £1 million government-funded project in Faversham, and it wasn't a Banksy. Fortunately, I spotted the artwork before it went any further, but sometimes it's too easy to be focused on one thing and not see the bigger picture. Here's another recent post from our young town ranger who was asked to tidy up a currently empty supermarket car park. It looked like a party had been going on the night before and had 30 odd empty bottles. However, he didn't immediately take a photograph, but took a photograph of the leaves he was tidying up. And of course, the keyboard warriors got out, questioning whether this was a good use of his time. It's very easy to stop comments on a post. And for those of you not familiar, you just go to the 3 dots on the top right-hand side, who can comment on your post, and we click on profiles and pages you mention, and that stops the commenting. We also use Moderation Assist. This is another way of stopping negative comments on our posts. A number of years ago, when we purchased our current offices, there were some words being bandied around. Shoe shop shambles were 3. Just by adding these words into keywords, it stopped a lot of people hijacking our posts. So this is a really useful method of immediately hiding posts that have certain words. Now, we have several policies, and there are a number of model template documents available if you are a member of the SLCC or NAUC. They're on their websites and they're easily adaptable for your own uses. There are also templates for communication and community engagement strategies. And don't forget your staff handbook about personal social media usage. These are books. If you like further reading, I find these books are really useful and I would recommend them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. Now I will move on to questions. So please do continue putting your questions in the Q&A box, and we will try and get through as many as possible. The first one, I think this is for you, Nikki. It says, we really struggle with responses from our local parish and groups. Our Facebook is very much in its infancy. I've tried polls, questions and posts. Do you have any tips to get more interaction? We are a small parish council of around 300 houses.
Great, thank you. I think the top tip here really is, I can see some comments already in the chat. It's really about experimenting, and Louise was talking about the analytics as well, what actually works, because sometimes you think quite sort of scientific about it, or the information that is of interest to you or that you want people to know about, but it's not the thing that actually engages them. So one of the things you do as a marketer is something they call A/B testing. So essentially that means having two slightly different variations of something. So for example, we do some A/B testing from time to time where we talk about a particular issue with an image, and then we might post something another day saying pretty much the same thing without an image. Do you find that people are engaging with those slightly differently? So there are tips and tricks around what you post and how you post them slightly differently. But also as well, it's about what keeps people coming back as well. And again, I think there's been some really nice examples actually from people online already about content that may not be the council actually broadcasting something that they're doing, but just sharing something that is of interest to the local community. I think somebody there talked about sharing some historical photographs or getting someone from your community to write something as well. So I think there is also just thinking a bit more broadly, not just what do you want to broadcast to people, because all of us, you don't want to just have people sort of talking in one way to you, telling you something the whole time, but is there something in there that's kind of information that's just of interest, engages you with your community as well? So I think thinking a little bit more about diversifying the content really. And then the final thing around that is, I think anyone who works in social media or media as well, it's actually having your schedule, having what they call in number 10, the grid. So what does your week, what does your month look like? There'll be certain things that you do want to post, as Daniel was talking about, things you want to signpost or share, events or activities that you want people to come along to. But once you've plotted those in, you'll know the kind of days or times when you have free reign in terms of your timing and your content as well. So are those the things where you can experiment with sort of sharing some other information to engage people and get them coming back to your page more regularly?
Thank you. Louise, Daniel, anything you wanted to add to what Nikki said?
I agree with everything that Nikki just said. I think experimenting is often key, and looking at analytics, as we've heard. I think the one thing actually I failed to talk about in my presentation, which I will just mention now because it's relevant to this question, is how much video are we using on social media? Because in the same way that, as Nikki said quite rightly earlier, that generally shorter, more succinct content is likely to get more engagement than much longer form pieces. Not always, but usually that's very true. Equally, video, which can just be recorded on a mobile phone, can be a very effective way to humanise the council, but also to get even more engagement. But ultimately, it's just about experimenting.
Great, thank you. Now, our next question, this also came through during your presentation, Nikki. Should only the clerk be posting Facebook content to the parish council page, or can councillors post too? And maybe Louise, you want to comment on this one as well?
I think Louise has kind of already answered that from her perspective. And I would very much say I agree with Louise. I think generally you need to think, is this a sort of personal page? Is this a corporate page? If it's a corporate page, I really think it should be the officers who are in control of that. And I think the sort of method that Louise spoke about, which is officers post, but councillors who are part of that social media network are responding to that, but also you need to think it's almost a bit like passing the baton on, isn't it, in social media and who you're telling the story to. So it's great if councillors see that information and then use it in their different networks, which may be slightly different from the council itself. But I think in general, you want some kind of consistency. You also don't want, for security reasons, too many people with access to something like that as well. So I think as part of your protocols and processes, you need to know who is in control, who has those passwords, who has the kind of sign off and the ability to kind of understand what it is you're posting and when as well. But I think Louise's example was really great in that respect.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question is, do you have any advice for dealing with negative posts on public Facebook groups? So this person says they get a lot of negative posts on public Facebook groups rather than their own Facebook page. And it's very difficult to manage those comments on public groups as they snowball, and it's difficult to defend themselves. Who wants to take that question?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very difficult, but the answer is to ignore it. And I know that that is really difficult. I've had that, and I find it's best ignored because it just escalates if you do anything else.
Thank you. The next question is, it's sort of related. I think you might have already just answered this. It's how should we best respond to disinformation about the parish council on non-parish council forums? Would that be a similar answer to the previous question? Okay. We will move on to the.
I'll just add one thing there, Jessica.
Yeah.
Sorry, is that all right? If we're getting that's less at the sort of abusive end of the scale, but it's more about misunderstanding. So people are complaining to us about things that we have, are not within our remit. I would slightly go back to your strategy there, and I would want to see what the council's own content looks like. Because so if, for example, a council is being criticised for something that is the responsibility of the principal authority. Let's pick an obvious one: potholes, highways issues. Okay. Then actually, what I would want to see in a council's social media plan every month is relevant content that regularly, preemptively and proactively signposts to the highways reporting tool, for example. So, because actually, yes, sometimes we may or may not have to react to things, but we can do things preemptively too.
Brilliant, thank you. Our next question is about people's feelings, or panelists' feelings on TikTok trends to raise engagement. Do any of you have any advice on councillors using TikTok?
I can jump in there.
Yes,
So
yeah.
It's been an interesting one, I think, in local government, because certainly I know some councils have followed the protocols in government, which as of last year, there was a bit of nobody go near TikTok. We're not kind of sure around sort of safety features on that. So I think a lot of people don't engage with it, certainly at a corporate level. For councillors, if that's where your audience is, it again goes back to who are you trying to reach? Which are the social media platforms that they're on. It can be a really great place. And interestingly, in a role previously, before I started working at the Local Government Association, I was working with sixth forms and universities, and TikTok was really heavily investing in universities getting involved in TikTok in something they call TikTok education. So it doesn't have to be just completely frivolous in terms of, lifestyle type things. There is actually some quite interesting things there that people have done, which is, you could see it from a town or a parish council, showing people something of interest in your local area, talking about the history, some interesting facts. So there is a really good way of using it to bring things to life. I think with all of this, though, it's just going back to what Daniel was saying, is it worth the investment in somebody's time? What are you trying to do? If going out and kind of making little fun videos and talking about your local area is something you like doing and it could have some benefits, that's great. If actually what you really want to do is get some key information out to your local residents, it probably isn't the right platform for you.
I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is about how do you set up a Facebook page so it's not linked to a personal account? Is that possible?
So Facebook is really frustrating because, of course, Facebook scarily has been around in some form or other for almost 20 years. And I discovered that I started using it 18 years ago. That aside, that's relevant because Facebook works differently to other platforms. So if a parish or town council decided this afternoon it wanted to start using Instagram, it very simply goes to instagram.com or downloads the app, and an officer can start using it as the council. Very straightforward. For Facebook, unfortunately, because it's the grandparent of social media, it does work differently, and there are layers to it. So to use Facebook, you have to have a personal account, number one. And with personal accounts, we have friends in Facebook parlance. You then use a personal account to create a page, which is the public-facing facility that Facebook provides for organisations, including councils. Now, there are a couple of very quick things on that, and then Louise and Nikki will want to come in too. I get that's frustrating, but you can separate them so that, sorry, they are then separate so that the public cannot see you personally behind the page. There is a big wall separating the two, and you can stop notifications appearing on your personal device that relate to your work role, because having that clear blue water between personal life and work life is obviously important. The thing that I know some councils do is create either parish clerk or similar Facebook profiles in order to manage the page. Just be slightly careful of that, because that technically goes against Facebook's terms of service, because you're meant to be a real person. And I have seen around the country some accounts get blocked. It's not perfect. It's one of the frustrations with Facebook. But Nikki or Louise might have something to add to that potentially.
Did either of you want to come in? Come in there.
I can just say from my personal perspective, I do have a town clerk profile, but all our pages are with my personal profile. But then we get to add other admins. I'm assuming one day I will go and I will leave other admins. So it's it's forever rolling with Facebook.
Great, thank you. Nikki, did you want to come in there? I'm afraid I can't hear you there. I'll move on to the next. I'll move on to the next question, I think. So the next question is, we've got one about Instagram and increasing followers on Instagram, and then another question about whether it's worth town councils using Twitter or X, sorry, anymore, as they don't get as much engagement now, and I think it's possibly due to people leaving X. So Daniel, did you want to kind of come in there first?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to your strategy, I'm afraid, because the question, should we use Twitter or X? I still call it Twitter, so forgive me. Should we use Twitter? Should we use TikTok? Should we use insert name of platform here? The answer to that question will vary according to every council, because it comes back to, what are you trying to achieve? How is it going to help you communicate and engage more effectively with your community? Now, there are some councils that do use Twitter, X, particularly from a journalistic perspective. So they might use it to share press releases or timely updates. As we heard earlier, it is the one platform that is in the most public domain compared to all of them, actually, and is often used for such purposes. Is it right for your council? That's going to vary. But Instagram, which of course is a very visual platform, is increasingly used by parish and town councils as a secondary core platform alongside Facebook, partly because the two talk to each other, they connect, and you can run them side by side. There was a question about, can you operate them out of Business Suite, which is a meta platform, and the answer is yes. And Instagram can be a very good place to build up a following to, alongside Facebook, as two primary platforms.
And do you have any tips for increasing followers on Instagram?
Yes, I'll be very quick. Sorry to yes, because it's visual content, that requires an extra level of thinking around how is Instagram used by our community. So it's not just the formal stuff around meetings and events. I saw a town council that I now can't remember which one it was recently, that on Instagram shared a photo that an officer had taken that morning of the high street, and it encouraged residents to share their favourite photos they'd taken in the last week. None of that is statutory or obviously relevant, but actually it builds positive discourse and engagement, which in turn makes people more likely to pay attention when we have something serious to say.
Great, thank you. Louise and Nikki, did you want to come in on either increasing Instagram followers or whether you think Twitter or X is still worth using for councils?
We use X, but very rarely now, very rarely. And Instagram, we are trying to grow. But also, if you're using the Meta Business Suite and you're posting to both Facebook and Instagram, you need to be careful because the photographs get changed. So they get changed to Instagram size. So when you look at Facebook, it looks a bit weird.
Okay, thanks for that helpful tip. I think our next question is from someone saying they They've got an ex-councillor with a grudge who's created a page spreading and sharing information which is riling up local residents. How do they deal with this? Is this another case of ignore, or do you have a strategy they can use to deal with that?
Shall I come in to start?
Yes.
And others,
Yes, please.
others may
Yes.
wish to. I mean, it's
Yes.
slightly difficult with this without knowing the ins and outs of it, but I
Yeah.
think you are getting into the territory now where it is this something that is, well, firstly, have you brought it to the attention of the council? I know it's an ex-councillor, but do they know about this? Is it something as well that you could or should be reporting to the platform that this is on as well, particularly if it's in the realm of mis or disinformation? And I think, you know, let's remember this year we're in a big election year globally, aren't we? Lots of local elections, potentially a general election, lots of things happening around. So there's a particular interest in mis and disinformation at the moment. So I think if there is something there that you're getting this persistently, if it is becoming malicious, I think it is worth escalating, and you could start with the platform itself and see how they respond and see if they suggest that there are further steps that you can take. In terms of just, you know, on a day-to-day basis, I think it is the advice there around trying to kind of take that step back, not responding, but also as well, perhaps it's something I was saying earlier about thinking who else is there in your kind of community who could act as a digital ally here as well. So if this person is persistently posting something about you, are there other colleagues who, you know, perhaps this person might listen to, who could be posting there around, you know, be careful about your language, be respectful, this is not accurate information as well.
Great, thank you, Nikki. Louise or Daniel, did you want to come in?
I would agree with what
Yeah.
Nikki said. I think the answer will vary slightly according to the detail, but Nikki said it's worth pointing out the platforms are, partly because of public pressure, are getting increasingly better at dealing with reports of such things. So if there is, you know, somebody who's doing something very bad like that, then do report them to their own platform, and usually action will be taken.
Brilliant, thank you. So our next question is about asking for recommendations for reaching the 18 to 30 kind of age range where they aren't on Facebook but are on more closed social media channels. Now, I know you mentioned that the young people predominantly use Snapchat and TikTok. Are you able to kind of expand on how to reach those age groups at all?
I suppose my first tip is, yeah, you've got to obviously be on the platform to engage with them. You can't expect people to suddenly change their preference about where they want to be to get your information. So understand where they are, what's the kind of content that they want to use. The most important thing, I think, on social media, and particularly if we are thinking about as an individual, but also I suppose the corporate identity as well, is you need to be kind of quite authentic as well. So the worst thing that you can do is, you know, use the information that you might put on Facebook on something like TikTok, or, you know, a channel where you're trying to reach younger audiences. It doesn't really work. So I think before you start posting, you just kind of need to understand the sort of character or the spirit of that particular social media, so that you don't walk into it in a slightly tone deaf way. The other thing you can do is, I think, you know, think about the best person to be the messenger for you as well there. So it may not be something that every councillor would want to do, or indeed every council officer, but, you know, are there younger people on your council as elected representatives? Are there younger officers? Perhaps it's the kind of platform that you get them to kind of experiment and own and really start to use as well.
Great, thank you. Louise.
Can I just add to that one?
Yes.
Sorry, Louise first. Apologies, Louise, for doing it to come in.
No, go ahead, Daniel, that's fine.
Just building on a couple of those. So I think it's important to remember as well that we need to be careful. What do we mean by the term young people? Because are we talking about people who are in their, you know, teens and in education? Are we talking people in their 20s or early 30s? And the reason it's important to think about that is the way we engage with different cohorts or subsets of that broad term young people is quite different. equally not talking down to them. I completely agree with what Nikki said around who is the messenger. I'm just going to put a link into the chat to a parish council in West Sussex. It's a rural council called Billingshurst, and during COVID, they did a consultation on the future of a skate park. Skate parks, of course, mainly used by people under the age of 20, not always, not all, but majority. And they used a skate park user who was known to the council to act as the messenger, to communicate the message. And not only did that particular video on Facebook and Instagram get several thousand watches, it resulted in several hundred submissions by young people to that consultation. I'll just put a link in the chat for people to have a look at later. If you scroll down, it's one of the videos taken during COVID. It's visibly at the skate park, but it's a great example. So tonality is key, thinking about tonality, thinking about message. And again, authentic. I think I would agree with what Nikki said.
Great, thank you. Louise?
I would just say that is a huge gap in our reach for young people, and a lot of it is down to resources. It's very difficult to reach them.
Great, thank you. And now our next question is it a good idea to post a Meet Your Parish Council with a photo and a short biography of each parish councillor? Do you want to come in there?
For me, it's very simple, yes.
Yeah.
When I'm not sure how else to add to that really, when I was looking at some of the best practice examples, because one of the things, by the way, and someone put this in the chat earlier, it's really easy to go and find best practice because all you do is, particularly on Facebook, is you search for the word parish council or town council and just look at content from around the country. And quite often you will see photos and bios and interviews with councillors. Now, of course, we have to bear in mind sensitivities around pre-election periods, all that kind of compliance issues. But fundamentally, show people who their councillors are. Let's celebrate success, welcome people. Road Parish Council in Northamptonshire did a really, really, really good, go and look at them on Facebook. They did a really good advent calendar style, slightly gentle humour being used, series of content before Christmas. And it actually boosted engagement, but it was also done to try and tackle some negative engagement that had also been experienced. So video works, bringing and showcasing our councillors works when it's done in a non-political way.
Great, thank you.
Can I just perhaps answer that? I agree. I think that's it's absolutely, everyone wants to know who their councillors are, and it's great if they can get that extra information. I think there are some, as Daniel was saying, some sort of fun things you can do there. So it could be a place where you could offer something up about, your favorite thing about your local area, or a sort of top tip about the area that you live and work in as well. The other thing to think about as well is posting information as part of that around how to contact people as well, because I know we all find this quite frustrating in all parts of our life, really, that you want to get in touch with somebody, but increasingly now it's quite difficult sometimes to actually find the best way to do that. So if you've set up the way in which you want to engage with your residents, whether that's through your Facebook page or whether it's another mechanism as well, sharing that as well, I think is really helpful.
Great, thank you. I think we've got time for a few more questions. So first of all, a question for you, Louise. Does Faversham Town Council get any engagement with council meeting events on Facebook? And do you get any members of the public turning up except at the annual town meeting?
Unfortunately not. We use hybrids method at the moment, so we do get a couple of people via Zoom, but no. It works much better for our events, I'm afraid, rather than our council meetings.
Okay, thank you. Next question is about I think you've kind of already sort of answered this, Louise, but what's the thinking around engagement with an older demographic rather than the younger social media users?
Yes, as I've said, resources really.
Yeah.
And also, well, in the office, we are of the older age, and it's very difficult for us. I have to admit, I went onto TikTok and I came off pretty quick because I didn't have a clue. So I think, yes, its capabilities is a lot of that, or lack of.
Yeah. That's no, that's very helpful. Daniel or Nikki, did you want to come in there?
Nikki, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we talk quite often, don't we, about how do we get people to be on our channels? But I do think we just need to always just keep asking ourselves about where are they? Where are the other places that we can engage with them? And I think if we think back particularly to the pandemic, you know, councils experimented with lots of things to get really important information out to them. But there were often segments of our communities that it was harder to reach, and particularly because of digital exclusion as well. So perhaps the question isn't always, you know, how do we get those people online and engaging, and more just, you know, what are the more traditional or the other methods that we can use to get information out to them, whether that's, you know, through local libraries or community groups, leafleting, things like that still as well. It's having that mix. And I think also as well, just remembering, you know, Daniel saying, Facebook is now 20 years old or so. Things do change and people do change as well. So I think, you know, in 5 years' time, we might be talking about the over 65s, but the over 65s then probably will have been using social media a lot more than people who are 65 plus nowadays. So we just need to keep kind of challenging ourselves around that.
I completely agree. Just to add one thing very quickly to that is with every form of communication and community engagement, whether it's online or offline, as a council, we are competing for attention. We need to think about it from a resident's perspective. When, as residents ourselves, we are bombarded by thousands of pieces of communications information every day. So for a council to have its message noted by any part of its demographic, it needs to communicate in different ways through different channels, online and offline, and do it repeatedly and consistently.
Brilliant, thank you. Now I'm going to squeeze in one more question because it's come up a couple of times, and it's about advice for councils where either the clerk is too busy to manage a social media page and is perhaps the only employee, or doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't have the skills to use social media. Do you have any advice there? Ed?
I'm happy to offer some thoughts on that. In most councils, of course, and it should be the case that officers are the practitioners and officers are the people that administer social media. I'm aware around the country of, particularly in very small parishes where there is very limited officer capacity, where often there are communications working groups or committees some of whom, with appropriate delegated authority and governance in place, support the work of social media, including, in some cases, even volunteers. Fundamentally, if we don't have the internal resource to do it, we obviously need to ask ourselves, how can we do that if we think it's a priority for us? I would always, ideally, want it to be officer administered and run where possible. And if we are getting councillors or volunteers involved, there needs to be really strong governance arrangements around it, because what we can't have is someone using it for their own personal or even political purposes, or equally running off with it. And I've seen both, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Really helpful answer there. Nikki or Louise, do you want to come in there before we wrap up? Okay, well, we'll wrap up there then. I'm very sorry if we weren't able to get to your question. On a final note, could I ask all of our speakers to sum up by offering one do and one don't for local councils when it comes to using social media? We'll start with yourself, Nikki.
Great. Well, my do is do experiment. So, you know, don't just keep pumping out the same thing. Try something different from time to time. That could be the timing that you post, the use of images, just writing things and delivering it in a different way. So try something different and just see how that works. And my don't is don't spread yourself too thinly. I think we've spoken quite a lot today about the pressure to have a presence on every social media platform. It's not going to be right for every council or every individual. And as Daniel and others have said as well, there are resourcing issues. So pick one thing, do it well, rather than do too many things.
Great, thank you. Daniel?
Do have a resource appropriate strategy that is right for your council and considers the who, the what, the why, the where, the how, and don't underestimate or ignore the power that social media plays in every community across the land going forward.
Great. Louise?
Well, I'm going to start with the don't. don't be put off for using social media by keyboard warriors, and do keep posting.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's a really positive note to end on. So firstly, a huge thank you to our fantastic speakers today, Nikki, Daniel and Louise, for all of your valuable insights and contributions. Please do fill out the feedback form when it appears on your screen. Our post-event mailing, which will go to all of you, will include the chat and all the presentations you saw today. The recording will be uploaded to our website shortly after the event. And NELC would like to say a huge thank you again to its partners for today's online event, Clear Councils, CCLA and Bless Share Illuminations. And don't forget to check out our brilliant online events programme for events coming up through the spring. Thanks for joining today. Goodbye.